Removed U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, wanted prosecutor who says he was investigating Burisma-Bidengate, fired too. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Today we're going to be talking about Ukraine, the State Department again, and what's going on with all of these officials. Former Vice President Joe Biden wanted the Prosecutor General fired back in 2016. He had him removed and conditioned $1.2 billion of loan guarantees. And it happened. Viktor Shokin, he was the Prosecutor General. He did get fired. And Joe Biden went to the Council on Foreign Relations in 2018, and he bragged about it. Well, it turns out that he's not the only U.S. official who is having prosecutors fired in Ukraine. Apparently, it's fairly common practice. Now recalled U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch to Ukraine, removed from her post in May, attempted to have anti-corruption prosecutor Nazar Kholodnytskyi fired in March. In a March 5 speech to the Ukraine Media Center, seen pictured here, she stated, quote, "To ensure the integrity of anti-corruption institutions, the special anti-corruption prosecutor must be replaced," accusing Kholodnytskyi of, quote, being recorded, coaching suspects on how to avoid corruption charges, and that he would no longer, quote, be trusted to prosecute those very same cases. And she added, "Those responsible for corruption should be investigated, prosecuted, and if guilty, go to jail. And in order for that to happen, all of the elements of the anti-corruption architecture must be in place and must be working effectively," Yovanovitch declared. Now, on March 20, this all happened this year. On March 20, perhaps in response, then Ukrainian Prosecutor General Yuriy Lutsenko did this interview with John Solomon over at The Hill, and he told him that rooting out corruption in Ukraine was difficult because, in his words, and this is unbelievable. This is Lutsenko pictured here. This was on April 1st. He says, quote, "Unfortunately, from the first meeting with the U.S. ambassador in Kiev, Yovanovitch gave me a list of people whom we should not prosecute." This is unbelievable. A do not prosecute list. This was an unbelievable claim coming from Ukraine's equivalent of an attorney general, and to do it in a U.S. newspaper. This was a kind of, think of it like an explosion on U.S.-Ukrainian relations. This was a massive scandal in Ukraine, and the press in Ukraine, they were covering this. And it was coming just weeks before the presidential election. And it was a major scandal for then President Petro Poroshenko, who was facing re-election in just a few short weeks, and came amid more allegations that the Poroshenko administration had helped the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 by digging up dirt on then Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort back in 2016. Now, Lutsenko also said that the State Department was withholding $4 million of aid that was supposed to go to his office, which the State Department denied, along with denying the allegations against Yovanovitch. The statement included, quote, "The allegations by the Prosecutor General are not true and are intended to tarnish the reputation of Ambassador Yovanovitch." So there was some pushback there, and also the same statements coming from the State Department said, quote, "The United States is not currently providing any assistance to the Prosecutor General's office, but did previously attempt to support fundamental justice sector reform, including the PGO," that's the Prosecutor General's office, "in the aftermath of the 2014 Revolution of Dignity." That's when Viktor Yanukovych was overthrown in a coup. When the political will for genuine reform by successive prosecutors general proved lacking, we exercised our fiduciary responsibility to the American taxpayer and redirected assistance to more productive projects. So here again, the State Department appears to be saying that it was making funding to Ukraine contingent on firing prosecutors. This time it was Kholodnytskyi. Now, just a couple of weeks later, that's when Solomon reported Kholodnytskyi had reopened the office's investigation of Burisma Holdings following Joe Biden's January 2018 comments to the Council on Foreign Relations about having the former Prosecutor General General Viktor Shokin, Lutsenko's predecessor, fired in March of 2016. And we've covered this before. Biden told the Council on Foreign Relations he was conditioning the loan guarantees, $1.2 billion. He said, quote, I said, you're not getting the billion. I'm going to be leaving here. I think it was about 6 hours. I looked at them and said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor is not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch, he got fired, and they put in place someone else who was solid at the time. And it turns out that then Shokin tells John Solomon, I was investigating Burisma. I was investigating the Bidens. He had plans for investigations and interrogations. It was going to include Hunter Biden. That's what he says now. I can't say for a fact, but his successor, Lutsenko, he says, I'm trying to get this information to William Barr, U.S. Attorney General. And this was all prior to the election of Zelensky, which happened in later April. And it was by quite a landslide, but we'll get to that. Here, Biden is referring to Lutsenko, the same prosecutor general, as being solid. He says, oh, we're going to get rid of Shokin, we'll put in Lutsenko, and he'll be more solid. So he's referring to Lutsenko, the same prosecutor general that later accused Ambassador Yovanovitch of giving him a do-not-prosecute list, and he says he was solid. So if he was solid, and he says that the ambassador says, stop trying to interview people visiting the embassy, maybe it appears the prosecutor general office in Ukraine is basically getting tired of being bossed around by the embassy. Viktor Shokin, Lutsenko's predecessor, who Biden bragged about firing, also told John Solomon prior to the election of Zelensky that he was removed because of the investigation of Burisma, which Biden's son Hunter served on the board of directors of. Shokin told Solomon he had, quote, specific plans to investigate, including, quote, interrogations and other crime investigation procedures into all members of the executive board, including Hunter Biden. So apparently the Ukrainian officials are not happy with Biden's admission at the Council on Foreign Relations. It was a huge admission by Biden to do this in January of 2018. Well, apparently that's what caused Ukraine to start to look into this again. And if you look at Solomon's reporting on this, he, quote, Ukrainian prosecutors say they have tried to get this information to the U.S. Justice Department since the summer of 2018. That was over a year ago, fearing it might be evidence of possible violations of U.S. ethics laws. First, they hired a former federal prosecutor to bring the information to the U.S. attorney in New York, who they say showed no interest. Then Ukrainians reached out to President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and Rudy's like a dog's got the bone, and he's holding on to it. He says he's done this before. He helped to bring down mafia when he was a U.S. attorney, so he has experience with this sort of thing. And I wouldn't bet against Giuliani getting to the bottom of something like this, because he's got means. He's not an amateur. He's done this before, and against very dangerous people. But leaving that aside, apparently the Ukrainians are not happy with Biden. They're not happy with being bossed around. And so here's Lutsenko talking to Solomon. He says, quote, unfortunately, Mr. Biden had correlated and connected this aid with some of the HR personnel issues and changes in the prosecutor's office. Kholodnytskyi, for his part, referring to the Burisma investigation, told Solomon, quote, we were able to start this case again, but we don't see any result from this case 1 year after reopening because of some external influence. Now, at this point, Yovanovitch is still the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. She gets removed, and again, she was trying to have this Kholodnytskyi fired, and this interference ongoing with the prosecutor general's office. And I think that there's a scandal there, but you basically have the equivalent of the Attorney General's office of Ukraine telling our Justice Department, you got to look at this. We have a mutual legal assistance treaty with Ukraine, and it's there for a reason. It's when things like this are happening. You have cases that involve U.S. persons and Ukrainian persons, and we have these treaties with many, many other allies and countries, and they're supposed to be cooperating, and they were requesting our assistance, not the other way around. So the timeline doesn't work. Trump talked to Zelensky after he was elected in July of 2019. But according to Solomon's reporting, this whole case began back in 2018, and it was following Joe Biden's comments to the Council on Foreign Relations, where he's bragging about getting this prosecutor general fired. Biden did this to himself. The fact that Ukraine would say, this guy, this former vice president says that he was getting our people fired. Maybe there was something to that case. Let's go look at that case again. Hey, the United States can help us. Maybe the new attorney general can help us, William Barr. And so people are trying to get to the bottom of what's going on with the corruption in Ukraine at the prosecutor general's office and the top anti-corruption prosecutor. I mean, if he's trying to do his job, I mean, Barr can look into that and they can provide assistance. I don't see anything wrong with that. They should do that. Now, Lutsenko told Solomon he wanted to give the information to Attorney General Barr. The U.S. and Ukraine have this treaty. Then on April 21, comedian Volodymyr Zelensky trounced Petro Poroshenko in the election on an anti-corruption platform and promising to help end the civil war in Ukraine that began in 2014. And he garnered 73% of the vote. That's amazing. He won almost every single province in Ukraine. And I mean, that was an amazing outcome. But just think of, and he ran on an anti-corruption platform. Just think of how corrupt the Poroshenko regime was perceived to be. And then right at the eve of the election, this scandal breaks out, and it's the Poroshenko fired the prosecutor general who was looking into potential corruption at Burisma. This was a huge scandal. It's why Zelensky won as handily as he did, and they basically cleaned up in the parliamentary elections as well. So they're going to have an absolute majority there in Ukraine. Zelensky can, govern probably fairly effectively from that standpoint. He's got a pretty, good majority there. So weeks later, on May 7th, Yovanovitch was recalled from her post amid allegations that she was undermining U.S. policy in Ukraine. Now, the Wall Street Journal has been reporting on this as well. And according to a senior administration official in the Wall Street Journal report, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo supported the move of recalling the ambassador. And consider these allegations. I mean, he had their prosecutor general go on television basically and say that the ambassador is corrupt and is giving me do not prosecute lists. I mean, they've lost clearly Yovanovitch has lost the faith of the Ukrainians. So even if Lutsenko was making it all up, you would almost need a new ambassador just to kind of fix the relationship and have someone there that they feel more comfortable with. Maybe they just wanted to get rid of her. That's possible, I suppose. Although you do have Shokin, the former prosecutor general, or the former prosecutor general, and Lutsenko, who is now the former prosecutor general, and they were both saying the same thing, that this Burisma case needed to be investigated. And this is not about the impeachment. Is not about this conversation that occurred in July. It's about Yovanovitch and the fact that she was removed from her post at the State Department in Ukraine. And she was accused of interfering with Ukrainian anti-corruption investigations. But the timeline simply does not work here. In July of 2019, Trump is having a conversation with Zelensky where this issue comes up about the corruption, about Burisma, and Trump mentions it. And Zelensky told Trump he already knew about the investigation because it had been ongoing since 2018, per John Solomon's reporting that predated Zelensky ever getting elected. Zelensky, in this transcript that has been declassified, occurred on July 25, 2019. What he said was, quote, "I understand and I'm knowledgeable about the situation," speaking on Biden, "since we have won the absolute majority in our parliament. The next prosecutor general will be 100% my person, my candidate, who will be approved by the parliament and will start as a new prosecutor in September. He or she will look into the situation specifically to the company that you mentioned in this issue. The issue of this investigation of the case is actually the issue of making sure to restore the honesty, so we will take care of that and work on the investigation of the case." And Zelensky even requested assistance from Trump, saying, quote, "On top of that, I would kindly ask you if you have any additional information that you can provide to us. It would be very helpful for the investigation to make sure that we administer justice in our country." So Zelensky's telling Trump, this Burisma case, this is essential to my administration. We have to get to the bottom of corruption in Ukraine, and I'm the guy who was elected to do that. Please help us. This is perfectly appropriate, legal, and frankly normal under these mutual legal assistance treaties. This is how the types of conversations that heads of state have about issues of mutual concern, and in this case on a law enforcement matter. I mean, the idea is that Shokin said he wanted to talk to Hunter Biden via an investigation. He also said that everyone's innocent until proven guilty. And so Hunter Biden might not even be the subject of such an investigation. This could have to do with the people, figures, officials, former officials in the Poroshenko administration. Or something that went on there. In any event, there's no reason not to investigate if, from Trump's standpoint, all he's got to do is say, get with the attorney general and you guys can share information and then get to the bottom of any crimes were committed. That's perfectly legitimate, and I think that's what happened here. The fact that it's been leaked to the New York Times and the Washington Post, and then the Trump White House says, well, heck with it, let's release the transcript because there's nothing here. And there clearly is nothing here. I think that this is a big miscalculation by whoever came up with this idea. Think about it. They're moving to impeachment at 100 miles per hour. Based upon a couple of weeks notice. You have this conversation on July 25th, and early August you got the whistleblower complaint, and then boom, we're in impeachment. So they barely thought this through, and maybe they didn't have access to the transcript and they couldn't see that there was no quid pro quo here. There really wasn't. And to just emphasize this point about the timeline, that this investigation actually began long before Zelensky was even elected. It occurred long before he was even running for president. That happened on New Year's Eve. Zelensky said on December 31 on television in Ukraine, he's a comedian. He was in a television show about somebody who accidentally becomes president of Ukraine. And then I guess he had the idea, I'm going to run for president of Ukraine because Poroshenko is doing such a terrible job. So he makes this announcement on New Year's Eve, and then he goes on to win probably the biggest landslide in electoral history over there, 73% of the vote. That doesn't happen by mistake. The Ukrainians have obviously lost confidence in the Poroshenko administration, and it probably had a lot to do with this interview that Lutsenko gave to John Solomon, because it sounded so corrupt, and it does sound really corrupt. A do-not-prosecute list coming from the U.S. ambassador. I mean, even with that allegation, I don't know if that's true. But you need an ambassador over there who actually has the confidence of the State Department, the President of the United States, and the ally, Ukraine in this case. I think that we should have a good relationship with Ukraine. You just had a civil war break out there. And it started largely because the Obama administration was trying to get a European Union Ukraine trade deal passed, and it didn't work out that great. I mean, the trade deal got put into place, but the country is cut in half. Yanukovych had to flee the capital. There was this coup that occurred, and then we ended up supporting the coup. So the civil war that's going on there, Joe Biden and the Obama administration, they have a heavy hand in that, and Yovanovitch does too. I think that this is it's a major scandal. We do need to get to the bottom of what really happened in Ukraine. And then there's these allegations that Ukraine may have had its own election interference operation run against President Trump on behalf of Hillary Clinton. I think they should get to the bottom of that too. If we're going to get to the bottom of Russian interference in the elections, we should certainly get to the bottom of Ukrainian interference or any interference. Nobody should be doing this. We need free and fair elections in the United States. And if it's legitimate to investigate one, you must investigate the other. And I think that's what Attorney General William Barr is doing. The Justice Department, the Durham U.S. Attorney John Durham, they're looking into the foreign intelligence aspect of cooperating on this Russiagate allegation, this fiction that was debunked by Robert Mueller in his special counsel report, that there was no conspiracy with Russia. And so I think that if Ukraine had a role, I think they want to share information. That's what Trump was doing in the phone call. He's saying, help us out with the Russiagate investigation and the origins of it and what Ukraine may have had a role there and what information they have. That's all perfectly legitimate. Again, we have a mutual legal assistance treaty, and it's perfectly legal for President Trump to do that, to request assistance as well. And on the timeline issue, John Solomon, he's doing wonderful reporting. This guy should get the Pulitzer Prize. It's unbelievable what he's digging up here. Document reveals Ukraine had already reopened the probe of Hunter Biden linked firm months before Trump phone call. Here we go. A newly unearthed document shows that Ukrainian officials had opened a new probe into the firm linked to Hunter Biden months before President Trump's phone call with that country's leader. Fox News contributor John Solomon reported late Tuesday. Solomon said Tuesday on Hannity that the U.S. government knew Ukraine was planning to look again into the activities at Burisma Holdings, an energy company that employed then Vice President Joe Biden's son as a member of its board of directors early this year. The report is noteworthy because President Trump has been accused by Democrats of threatening in July to withhold foreign aid to Ukraine unless its new president pursued an investigation into the company and the younger Biden's role there. Quote, the U.S. government had open source intelligence, said Solomon, and was aware as early as February of 2019 that the Ukrainian government was planning to reopen the Burisma investigation. This is long before the president ever imagined having a call with President Zelensky because he hadn't been elected yet, noting that Petro Poroshenko was still Ukraine's president at the time. This is the impeachment, the basis for impeachment. There is no basis for impeachment. And I'll leave you with the close here because this is just nuts. No, this is about one disgruntled ambassador who had lost the faith of Ukrainian officials, President Trump, and Secretary of State Pompeo amid allegations she was obstructing Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts long before Zelensky even won the election. Now she's coming to testify to Congress. Ukraine says it has been investigating corruption, including at Burisma, in 2018 before Zelensky was even standing for election and was looking for U.S. help to root it out, not the other way around. This phone call in July of 2019, it's not what caused the investigation, which had been going on for a year. Where's the quid pro quo to investigate Biden? In a time machine? That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.